Far beyond the bounds of Earth territory, in one of the farthest corners of known space, dwelled a race known as the Dilgar Imperium. A proud, warrior people, they believed themselves to be the center of the universe. All other races were destined to serve them, in whatever way the Dilgar saw fit. Unfortunately, the Dilgar were still new to interstellar travel, and seemed surrounded by much larger, more capable races than they could ever hope to defeat. What was needed was a long-term plan for conquest, but as it turned out, fate did not give the Dilgar that time. Through scientific research, the Dilgar learned that their sun would meet a catastrophic end sometime in the coming few decades. Their homeworld of Amelos was doomed. Suddenly they had no choice but to accelerate their plans. To a race as self-centered as the Dilgar, asking for help was anathema, and indeed, those in charge never gave it the slightest consideration. No, the Dilgar would carve out their own empire using whatever force was required, and then move their entire population to whichever conquered world best met their criteria. In the 2220s, the Dilgar became very active in exploring and researching nearby space. Coreward, they found a powerful middleborn race known as the Talconisha, whose vast fleet of living starships brooked not the slightest intrusion. To Anti-Sprial lay only useless, burned-out systems and the void between galactic spiral arms. Their only choices were Spin-Ward and Rim-Ward, where they discovered the scattered and divided races of the League of Non-Aligned Worlds. For many years, Faxer-class spy ships and Protra-class scout vessels roamed through League space and neighboring races, offering trade treaties and establishing diplomatic relations. The crews of these ships were actually highly trained spies adept at gathering intelligence and returning it secretly to their masters back on Amelos. Although some of these ships were caught and destroyed, the League was so compartmentalized that they never suspected what the Dilgar were truly up to. Finally, in 2228, the Imperium made its first assault. Their early ship designs, constructed with the fruits of countless stolen technological data, would have been swept aside by most of the other races' larger fleets, so they wisely selected one of the weakest independent powers of the region, the Alakan Republic. Alaka was isolated and had very little in the way of defenses, and was quickly overwhelmed. So quickly was their defeat. Own borders with the Dilgar, but they were a pacifistic people and did not see the rape of Alaka as a strong enough reason to go to war. The Drazi, who also shared a border with the Dilgar, were more worried about the enormous Narn regime than an upstart race with only a few planets to its name. The rest of the League saw the Dilgar as someone else's problem and ignored it. Had they paid more attention, however, the Drazi would have been more concerned. Prior to the Alakan invasion, the Dilgar had cleverly provoked an incident with the Narns and then rushed to pay reparations, following up their good faith with a treaty of non-aggression designed to keep the regime out of the coming conflict. The ploy worked to perfection, and the Dilgar invaded both Drazi and Abai space simultaneously in 2230, without fear of aggression by the much larger power towards the Rim. Initial successes were met on both fronts. The Abai, who occupied only one colony of any significance, eventually fell back to their homeworld and circled the wagons there, under the guns of their powerful and well-shielded fortifications. The Drazi also fell back initially, opening up some of their frontier worlds to horrible atrocities by the Dilgar, but eventually counterattacked and stabilized a front line. The Dilgar, unwilling to sacrifice the immense resources required to break through and utterly destroy their foes, instead settled upon a plan whereby those two borders would be used to initiate and train new crews, test newly designed weapons, and the like, while veteran forces continued to advance into League space. After all, the clock was ticking for the Dilgar, and neither the Abai nor the Drazi possessed a planet capable of supporting the entire population of Amelos. After all, the clock was counting down for the Dilgar and its doomed sun. The Abai worlds were unsuitable for the entire population of Amelos, while the size of the Drazi freehold precluded pacification in a timely manner. The Imperium, therefore, pushed deeper into League space. Thus, in a move that would seem foolish to anyone not comprehending the desperate nature of the Dilgar, the invaders pressed their attack further into the League. They occupied the surface of Belows, driving the Belosian people into the underground, where they operated as a guerrilla force for years. From there, the Dilgar advanced on Tirith, driving out several races with claims to that system's vast resources, 1Z, and then proceeded to attack those very races directly. Even the powerful, much older Hayek were unable to stand up to the ferocious invaders, instead retreating to their homeworld in much the way as the Abai had done. There, the Hayek retreated behind their bases, keeping the Dilgar at bay with powerful long-ranged laser guns. Rather than assault this position and suffer terrible losses, the attackers simply bottled up their enemies as they had the Abai and moved on. The Dilgar continued to roll up all opposition as they steadily advanced towards the rim. The Brakiri, Kasker, and Ipsha soon found themselves under attack. Even as these races were bottled up at their respective homeworlds, the League of Non-Aligned Worlds still failed to act with any kind of unity. The races of that loosely organized group simply lacked the will to come to the aid of another, each steadfastly believing that the Dilgar would halt their attacks or exclude their nation. None ever thought it could happen to them, until the invasion fleet appeared along the border, by which time it was too late. When the Dilgar conquered the tiny race known as the Maitok, they finally found the planet they were looking for. A powerful base of operations was constructed on the Maitok homeworld, and plans were initiated to start shipping population off Amelos to this new site. However, by now the Dilgar military had become afflicted with the Conqueror's disease. After so many successes, and with no race strong enough or willing enough to resist them, they saw no reason not to press their attack deeper into the soft underbelly of the League. Further advances were made against the Dratsi, and a breakthrough force knocked the Her out of the war with one single stroke. The weak Deskari were rolled up within weeks, sending much of their population fleeing into nearby space as refugees. The Dilgar took great sport in hunting down and destroying these craft wherever possible, even pursuing some of them into the fringes of the Earth Alliance. By this point, Earth Dome was becoming concerned by the Dilgar drive. Early on in the invasions, a Dilgar task force destroyed the EAS Persephone, later claiming they mistook it for an enemy unit conducting espionage against their military. In fact, this was another attempt by the Dilgar to turn a mistake into a non-aggression treaty, just as had been done to keep the Narns out of the war. In this case, however, it backfired, as Earth saw no reason to trust a race that fired first and asked questions later. In fact, the Persephone incident did little more than alert Earth to the threat posed by the Dilgar. Still, the Alliance was in no position to intervene in the invasions by itself. Earth had, to this point, never fought a war beyond its own border. They did have a significant military, however, and since they shared no disputed territory with the Dilgar, they saw little risk of invasion by a race so far away. The Senate argued for months over what to do, even quietly stepping up warship and fighter production should the need arise to use them, but in the end, they chose to do nothing. Races like the Brakiri and Abai were far away, and the average citizen saw no reason to risk human lives to protect these distant aliens. Even the arrival of the Pyratinia and an escort of League ships could not change the minds of the Senate. The League envoy did, however, provide valuable technological information in the form of captured Dilgar fighters, the examination of which proved instrumental in improvements to the Starfury project. Eventually, the Dilgar advanced one step too far. They chose to invade Markab space. The Markab were one of Earth's strongest allies and best trading partners, and more than that, they shared a significant border with the Alliance. From either Tyre or Markab itself, the Dilgar could then directly threaten Altair, one of Earth's primary jump nexuses. Almost simultaneously with this invasion, the Pyratinia envoy, led by Ambassador Kalika of the Abai, made a final, desperate plea for Earth intervention. In this critical speech, Kalika compared the Dilgar to the oppressive Nazi regime of the mid-1900s. that, along with the suddenly visible threat to Earth's security, finally opened the eyes of most of the Senate. Although the Alliance had warned the Dilgar on numerous occasions not to attack the Markup, the Dilgar were unimpressed by Earth itself. Protoss scout ships, sent out in the late 2220s, reported that Earth territory was a hollow shell and its people singularly unwilling to fight. What was more, they insisted, the Terrans would never intervene directly unless the Dilgar made the mistake of crossing the border, something they were very careful not to do. While this strategy would have paid big dividends had the Alliance chosen not to attack, the unwillingness of the Dilgar to even consider the possibility of an Alliance attack left their badly overextended forces vulnerable to a concentrated strike. Shunning diplomatic niceties such as a declaration of war, the Earth Expeditionary Force crossed the Markup border and engaged Dilgar fleets in early 2232. In doing so, they took the Imperium completely by surprise. Although militarily they perhaps possessed the strength to resist Earth's early attacks, they were already at the fringes of their supply lines. What was more, the Imperium had awakened in the Markup a desperate need for revenge. The deeply religious Markup declared a jihad against the invaders and threw themselves against Dilgar with unfettered fury. This accelerated the Earth Alliance's pursuit of the Dilgar during their retreat, lest their allies destroy themselves against Dilgar fortifications. For the better part of a year, the Earth Expeditionary Force, under the command of Admiral Hamato, gradually drove the Dilgar back one system at a time. Now the Dilgar propensity to surround homeworlds but leave them alone for later pacification worked against them, as the advancing alliance freed up these bottled military assets for use against the Dilgar. The collected national fleets, out for revenge against their terrible oppressors, formed into a huge, poorly coordinated armada known as the Liberation Navy. While this group moved from homeworld to homeworld, setting free such races as the Kaskar, Berkiri, Hayek, and Abai, the Earth Expeditionary Force pressed the attack directly against Dilgar bases and supply lines. The Imperium's promised new homeworld of Mytok was lost, and in their anger the retreating Dilgar turned the planet into an irradiated wasteland. They performed similar atrocities at each liberated colony world, infuriating the people of the Earth Alliance and leaving no room for negotiations. The people of Earth, treated daily to new scenes of genocidal acts on the part of the Imperium, knew just how close they had come to suffering a similar fate. Indeed, they felt the only appropriate response was to pound the Dilgar right back to the Stone Age. Eventually, the Dilgar were driven back to their fortified positions at Alaka, Belos, Tasoulas, and Amelos itself. Tasoulas was the only system protecting the Drazi front, while Belos was the key to resisting the advancing Earth Expeditionary Force. The remaining Dilgar forces, now finally concentrated, were preparing to knock the Drazi completely out of the war when Admiral Hamato launched his offensive against Belos. He began by sending elements of the Free Belosian Navy, who had escaped the original invasion years before, intending to draw out the Dilgar defenders and spring the expeditionary fleet upon them in ambush. In this, Hamato employed another of the complex military plans that made him famous, but in this particular instance, his legendary luck and skill did not produce the desired results. The Dilgar did not take the bait, and in fact turned the tables by setting up an ambush of their own. Having temporarily retreated from Belosian space, the Dilgar returned with unexpected strength and managed to catch the Earth fleets in the process of landing troops to liberate the planet. The Alliance was forced to withdraw, leaving Gropo's units on the surface for months until a follow-up assault could be organized. This apparently grave setback ultimately proved to be an unexpected boon to the Alliance when the stranded ground forces linked up with Belosian guerrilla armies, who had been harassing the Dilgar garrisons for months. Natural underground dwellers, the Belosians and their new and well-equipped Gropo's brethren became quite a thorn in the side of the occupying army, and when Hamato launched his second strike, they simultaneously sabotaged command and control centers, ground batteries, and communication stations, crippling the Dilgar defense effort. The Dilgar naval elements put up a valiant fight, But in the end the might and fury of the Earth fleets was too much to resist. The Dilgar retreated for good, sabotaging their fortifications at Belos and Alika, and pulling back to their fortress at Amelos. After the Drazi took Tasoulas, they were suckered into an ill-advised assault on the homeworld, which was repulsed with heavy losses. The Dilgar hoped, in vain, that the sheer firepower of their defenses would be enough to make at least the Terrans reconsider. They were wrong. In late 2232, the assault on Amelos began. This battle was perhaps the most ferocious, vicious fight ever seen in known space. No quarter was asked by either side, and none was given. Crippled craft routinely rammed enemy units, and both sides employed numerous weapons of mass destruction. Admiral Hamato was killed when his flagship was smashed by a suicide attack, but in the end his forces won the day. The Dilgar were defeated, with only a few ships escaping into hyperspace. Most of these were later hunted down, but the one containing War Master Jadur, perhaps the worst of the war criminals, was never found. The victorious League forces imposed sanctions against the Dilgar intended to prevent them from ever taking aggressive action again. All surviving Dilgar citizens were rounded up and quarantined on their homeworld, and orbital satellites were placed to prevent any military construction or space flight of any kind. The victors remained unaware of the impending doom the Dilgar faced, a fact the Dilgar strangely allowed to remain hidden. In 2235, the secret came out, as the stellar event the Dilgar scientists predicted came to pass. All life was scoured from the face of Amelos, driving the Dilgar fire right out of the universe. With the end of the Dilgar, Earth became a major power in the galaxy. The League, Narn and even the Centauri openly admitted that the new Earth Alliance was now a force to be respected.